It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and we have something old and something new. The new is a replacement Starfleet uniform that just happens to coincide with a movie, and the old is a Bajoran painting the Cardigans half-inched when they were here. It's pretty well preserved for being around 20,000 years old, but then it is rather important. We're looking at the only painting of the lost city of Bahala, which is basically Bajor's version of Atlantis. You'd think the obelisk in the middle would have helped people find it again, what with the legend being that those symbols are coordinates, but only seeing two of the sides means half the answer is missing. Sisko orders for it to be scanned before it's shipped off to Bajor, him having a liking for all things old. He's looking again later when he notices whoever painted it put in sufficient effort for there to be a reflection of a third side. To a holosuite we go so we can get a better look. Sisko gets so wrapped up in the whole thing that Quark has to come and turf him out after closing time. There's no point in starting over from scratch next time though, so Sisko saves a copy. Well, he tries to. It's difficult to get the job done when you're being electrocuted. Not to worry, as there's no permanent damage. In fact, Bashir says Brainial electrocutions like this can have an unexpectedly pleasant side effect. All of Sisko's senses are going to be heightened for a few days. Maybe that's why he's complimentary of Jake's cooking. He's so interested in what's on his plate, in fact, that he's very non-committal about Cassidy Yates returning to the station tomorrow, her having spent half a year in prison for the whole supplying terrorists business. He's not playing with his food to avoid an awkward chat, though, so much as thinking about that obelisk again, and he claims to know the shapes he's made. He's in a holosuite putting them on the fourth and final side when he gets a call from an admiral. That smells like a good time to use the Wheel of Names and decide what we'll be calling him. Incidentally, I've done a little spring cleaning on the wheel and noted a few errors. If you're a patron and you can't see a name that you suggested, it's because I'm fucking incompetent and you shouldn't feel bad about dropping me a message. Anywho, our new admiral will be known to us as... Major Feckwit, provided by Commander Isla K, which is a bit of an emotion but bollocks to him. Major Feckwit is calling to give Sisko the good news. Sisko's initial assignment here, before all of the wormhole stuff came along, was to get Bajor to join the Federation. After 4 long years, the whole thing has finally been approved, and it'll be signed right here on the station, as a gesture to the emissary of their profits. The celebrations have started in Quark's. Kira's getting in on it and contemplating how opposed to the whole idea she was just a few years back. That makes her think about Sisko, but he's off looking at a holographic obelisk again, so she goes to find him. It takes a few attempts to make him respond, but that's to be expected when he's having a sacred vision and claims to have seen Bahala when he comes to. More than that, he thinks he understood everything for a brief second, including the coming war with the Dominion, until Kira pulled him out of it anyway. A call to tell him Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag, is on the way derails that conversation, but not his time with the obelisk. He sends Kira to greet her while he stares at holographic rocks some more. Maybe it's partly because Sisko wanted to put off an argument. Not everybody's overjoyed with the idea of Federation membership, and Kai Sin has committed to being non-committal, like what proper politicians do. She'll wait and see which way the wind blows before pinning her flag to the winner. Or maybe Sisko wanted to stay away so he could greet Cassidy Yates. She finds him still in the holosuite and is surprised that he greets her warmly, him considering the terrorism business a closed matter, and even more surprised when he invites her to Bajor. He thinks he knows where Bahala is and wants to take her there. There turns out to be a cavern underground, but then 20,000 years will do that to a city. He's not asked though, except for a moment when he gets a bit of a headache and poops his way through some rock to reveal a secret that's eluded others for generations. The discovery of a city lost for centuries certainly doesn't hurt Sisko's standing among Bajorans. Even Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag, realizes that something this big means eating a little humble pie. I guess when you've based your whole shtick on interpreting scripture for personal gain, it's difficult to ignore the one that said Bahala would be found by someone touched by the prophets. She even seems to think this is enough to break cover and come out in favor of Federation membership, though makes sure to phrase it as following his lead. For his part, Sisko doesn't seem to give shit one about the business with Federation membership. He's at the now bustling dig site, which is where Major Feckwit has to go to find him after having none of his calls returned. Sisko still thinks there's something to be found here, but doesn't know what. Major Feckwit reluctantly agrees to let him stay a while longer, provided he's back on the station tomorrow morning for a checkup from Bashir, one that might be wise based on the headache Sisko experiences once Major Feckwit has gone. It's the following morning, and Major Feckwit is losing his shit. He expected Sisko for his physical 15 minutes ago, though, to be fair, Sisko only agreed to return to the station by then, and he docked 25 minutes back. The reason for the delay seems to be Sisko dispensing advice and predictions on the way to the infirmary, in between the headaches, anyway. Even Major Feckwit gets one when Sisko says his son forgives him, a family argument that Major Feckwit hadn't told him about. The tests don't take long, but it's long enough for Sisko to have another vision, one about a swarm of locusts over a newly rebuilt Bahala that leave and fly to Cardassia. He doesn't get the chance to ponder the meaning as Bashir returns. Those headaches are indicative of a more serious problem. The Brainial lightning he took near the start of the show has got worse rather than gone away, and not treating it might result in a very dead Sisko. The treatment would also make his visions go away though, so Sisko tells him to bollocks. What's happening is too important. Even the joint onslaught of Jake and Cassidy trying to convince him fails. He's so sure of it, in fact, that he's enlisted Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag, to help him. Her help comes in the form of preparing him for an orb vision, or perhaps trying to convince him not to, as she urges caution. Whether that's for his sake or her desire to not add any more variables to an already unstable mix is left up to the viewer. He's still undergoing his vision when Major Feckwit and Kai Sin are ready to officially make Bajor a member of the Federation. Kai Sin gives a token effort towards suggesting they should wait for him, just enough for plausible deniability, before agreeing to go ahead. Sisko bursts in as Major Feckwit is mid-speech, which is handy as the delay gives Sisko a chance to stop it all. He says he's seen Bajor consumed unless it remains independent of the Federation, then has a little nap on the floor. Bashir's refusing to perform treatment, much to the ire of Major Feckwit. He says Sisko was clear about not wanting it, and that means the decision is up to the next of kin, which is Jake. The prospect of losing his father is too much for him to respect Sisko's wishes, and he tells Bashir to begin surgery. Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag, thinks it's the wrong choice, though Kira's more forgiving. It might even be what the prophets wanted, she thinks. Either way, Bajor has officially decided to delay joining the Federation based on what Sisko said. That this is what Kai Sin wanted in the first place has confused the piss out of her, as now she doesn't know what to think, so at least Kira gets a smile out of her discomfort. There's discomfort in the infirmary, too, when Sisko realizes what's happened. He thinks he was close to understanding how it all fits together, only to lose the lot. Major Feckwit could make him lose far more after what happened, but he has the good sense to realize that shit-canning Sisko would piss off the entirety of Bajor. Besides, Sisko says he's certain that Bajor will join the Federation. Now just isn't the right time. It's the right time for dinner, though, so we'll leave Jake and Cassidy to celebrate a return to normality, and Sisko to come to terms with it. Until the next adventure. Before we get into it, let's deal with the elephant of Sisko being given treatment, shall we? Jake overruling Sisko's decision got me curious enough to look into the matter. Be aware that the usual disclaimer of me just being some schmuck on the internet who read a thing applies here, so don't go considering it legal advice. Anywho, in the UK there's a piece of legislation called the Mental Capacity Act of 2005, which sets out the principle of an advanced decision to refuse treatment, or ADRT. It's Part 1, Section 24 through 26 if you fancy a read, but basically, this means you can express your wishes on a form of treatment and have that decision apply at any point in the future. It's actually a bit more complicated than that if we're talking about a life-threatening condition like we are here, with legalese that involves written statements and witnesses and shit, and ADRTs can be annulled by subsequent power of attorney that includes treatment authority, but for the sake of our situation, the principle is that the patient gets to choose and nobody has the power to overrule that decision. At least, nobody has the power to overrule the decision, providing it's valid, and one of the criteria for judging this is if the person making it had the capacity to do so when they made their wishes known. When Sisko refused treatment, he was already under the influence of something that was affecting his cognitive functions. Thing is, the very start of that act, the second point of Section 1, sets out that a person is assumed to have capacity as a baseline. They can only be considered incapable if it's proven, and that didn't happen here. We know it's affecting his brain, but not necessarily his capacity. All of which is to say that, based on how we consider such things now, Bashir did a bit of a no-no in giving the decision to Jake. Now, I know all of that hinges on people 300 years into the future using rules that we set out now, but agency over your own care is one of the most fundamental principles of medicine. The idea that a society which places greater emphasis on personal responsibility than ours today, having a more restrictive view of treatment, doesn't sit right with me. With all that being said, if we're being fair to the episode, everything you've just heard can probably be thrown out of the window. We're on record here previously as saying that what works best for the story is what should happen, and Sisko being the one to agree to the treatment would have undermined the narrative far more than it being Jake, in my opinion. Under the circumstances, it's probably the least worst option, but I thought it was interesting enough to explore the ethical aspect. Now that's done, let's have a look at the meat of it. Sisko gets some brain lightning and becomes either a conduit for the Prophets or somebody who's exceptionally good at cold reading. We know he's never been entirely comfortable with the role of emissary, despite him coming to terms with accepting it last season. You could even argue that his decisions in this episode were less to do with Bajor itself and more an innate desire for knowledge. He wasn't putting himself in danger entirely for them, but out of a more general curiosity. A cynical person might even wonder if that innate need to explore the unknown might be why the Prophets chose him, someone who could be manipulated into a course of action through predictable responses. Is it even manipulation if beings who live outside of time already know it happens before they prompt it? Regardless, his input here has significant consequences for Bajor. Joining the Federation, something that many here were entirely against after the occupation, is now on hiatus as a result of its strongest proponent. Even more interesting from a world-building perspective is the effect this has had on populists like Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag. Agitating the masses in order to control them requires defined enemies and targets. Sisko, and the Federation in general, backing off when something unforeseen comes along is completely at odds with the rhetoric Kai Sin and her ilk have spread about them being an invasion in all but name. The political fallout of that, and the discomfort of those who've realized they no longer understand the rules of the game they thought they were playing, is delightfully fun. We get some nods to future events too, albeit mostly vague or predictable. Referring to the oncoming Dominion War as a definite is the first glimpse of a concrete commitment we've had, but it's hardly a surprising one. We spent several seasons billing them as the big bad, and as I said in the Season 4 summary, you can only do that for so long before you have to get on with it. Of more interest is the comment about locusts and Cardassia. It's still sufficiently vague to mean a whole lot of things and gives the writers plenty of options, yet it's something that fits well enough with what's to come. Sometimes good planning is just giving yourself the freedom to choose later. And speaking of later, it's 6 months now after Cassidy got thrown in space jail for supporting a bit of the old terrorism. There's probably a whole conversation to be had there about what such a relatively short sentence says about public opinion towards the Marquis, and perhaps the Federation's attitude towards incarceration in general, but that's a whole video on its own, so let's stow it for now. The real reason for bringing her back is that we invested a lot of time in her as a recurring character and didn't want that wasted with a multi-year sentence, just as we did with Plain Simple Garak and his 6 months in a holding cell. Speaking of which, a point to the writers here for saying Cassidy was given a 6-month sentence too, just a couple of episodes after Plain Simple Garak was seen for the first time this season. That's either a happy coincidence or someone was paying attention to the internal chronology. Her taking a bit longer to return can be comfortably attributed to the civilian legal system, something Plain Simple Garak didn't have when Sisko sentenced him, and her prison being an indeterminate distance away. All in all, then, a solid episode with plenty to chew on. Anything that gives us a bit of Kai Sin is always worth the entrance fee for me, and this one had lots of other stuff going on whilst also managing to be a cohesive story itself. Consider it an example of long-term story building done right, not only as a payoff for things that came before, but also in setting up what's yet to come. End of episode.
It's not my fault.
I mean, it kind of is, though.
Okay, yes. If you look at it on a purely functional level, then it is, technically, my fault. However, I don't think I bear a moral responsibility.
You were looking at porn on the promenade.
I did not intentionally search for big old titties. The errors of voice recognition software from the late 20th century are not the responsibility of entities created several hundred years later.
Yeah, well, the magistrate didn't see it that way, did she? Anyway, I take it we're going to knock that software on the head after all of this.
I don't think we have much choice. If the voice recognition system hadn't considered goat poo and big old titties as two separate commands, they'd probably have thrown away the key. Woof.